Let's make a stocking cookie set together. These are the Christmas Socks Cookie Cutter set from Sugar Bomb. We're going to start with the longest and skinniest of the stockings, and we're going to pull out our edible pen or our scribe and just mark off where we want the cuff, heel, and toe to be. And then we're going to pull out the white royal icing and just outline the inside section. So anything that we didn't just outline with our edible pen or our scribe, the kind of middle section of your stocking. For this entire set, we're going to use three colors: white, red, and green, very traditional Christmas colors, and we're going to be using a hybrid icing. So this is not a line consistency, this is not a flood consistency, it combines both. It is also referred to as a 15 or 20-second icing because it takes about 15 to 20 seconds for this icing to settle. And that is important because this is what allows it to do both. So after you make the outline, you're just filling it in. And that's pretty typical of what you're going to see for every one of the cookies in this set, because we're going to be working on some wet on wet designs using our scribe to drag the icing around. So right now we are going to move on to using our scribe to just even out our icing. If we used a very traditional flood and a line, you don't have to use your scribe as much. But if you're just using one consistency for ease of use, you are going to use your scribe a little bit more, and that's okay. Next up, we're going to grab our red and just do dots down the leg of the stocking. You can also do it onto the foot, and I'll show you that a little bit later. And then you're going to take your scribe. I went for a fine point scribe. I'm a little obsessed with it. I just got it a few months ago. And you're going to drag right down the middle. So they kind of look like all of your dots connect. It can look like hearts, or it can look like you knitted a stocking. And that's kind of the look we're going for here. And we're going to alternate colors between red and green on the stocking, but keep doing the dots and then dragging our scribe through it. Now, this is where I'm going to continue my dots onto the foot part of the stocking, but you can extend it with the previous green or red, which I did do on another version of this exact stocking, just on another cookie that I was working on for this set. And so we're just repeating, adding dots, and then pulling our scribe through it. Some tips for using your scribe is to not go too deep. I have poked into my cookie before, going way too deep when I'm doing this drag method, and it can kind of leave some like holes in your icing almost. So to avoid that, don't go too deep, stay pretty much on the surface, and then you're going to let your cookie dry, mat over, crust over. You just don't want it to be a shiny before you move on to the toe, heel, and cuff. And for the toe, heel, and cuff of this stocking, you're going to pull out your red icing and you're going to want to outline and then fill in. You'll notice on this heel, my outline just immediately became a fill because my red was a little thinner than my white icing, and that's okay because it's still within that 15 to 20 seconds. Things settled and worked out just fine. Now, after you fill this in, you could just completely leave it. This is a cute stocking. No, don't need to do anything else. But I wanted to add some texture. I came across this technique of adding powdered sugar onto the top of wet icing, and it creates this almost like velvet texture as some of the powdered sugar soaks into the icing, and it creates this velvet texture on top, this kind of crusty, not just straight flat texture, and I really liked it. But one thing I learned doing it specifically for this set is that it can affect the rest of your icing if it's not dried all the way. So we're going to move on to the widest and shortest stocking in this set. It's still going to have the same initial base starting where we're outlining where the cuff is and where the heel is, not a toe on this one, although you certainly could do that if you wanted to, with our edible pen or with our scribe. If you use your scribe to create that outline, just make sure to brush your cookie off so you don't have little cookie crumbs in your icing. And then you're going to outline it with your white and then fill it in. Again, this is our 15 to 20 second hybrid icing. If you want to learn about how to make that, how to do that consistency, be sure to download the free guide that accompanies this video. It's in the description down below. With the velvet texture, kind of circling back to what I was talking about, I learned that you needed not just your cookie to be relatively dry, because these cookies were dry before I added the powdered sugar texture onto the wet icing. They were dry to the touch, but they weren't completely dried yet. And so some of that powdered sugar absorbed the moisture that was still on the body of that stocking. So this is going to be the candy cane stocking, and you're going to add dots, red dots in the shape of a candy cane. Then you're going to take your scribe around the outside edge of those dots and just outline the whole thing. So let's watch that again. I'm doing dots in the shape of a candy cane. I tended to add just a little too many onto the arch, and I'm going to go on the outside of the dots, just barely scraping them, and then go around and onto the inside of that candy cane. And that's going to drag that red around so it looks like the stripes of a candy cane. Definitely go slower because it'll help have a neater candy cane. And it'll help you just not have as much of an arch. If I want to be nitpicky about it, I can definitely see how I'm getting arched. And you can see this one goes off the side. I'm not going to worry about cleaning off my scribe like I normally would, because I want all of that color to drag through. And then the heel and the cuff of this one are going to be in green. And you can see I'm outlining it. It's a very thick outline. I don't need to worry about being very specific and light with that outline, because I'm just going to fill it in with green. And then again, I want my cookie to dry fully before I add the powdered sugar. Alternatively, you could flip these steps around and add the cuff and the heel, or with the first stocking, the cuff, the heel, and the toe, add the powdered sugar, allow that to dry enough for you to dust off the powdered sugar, and then come in and do the body so that it stays very vibrant. You can also just cover the entire cookie, even though the middle part's dry, in powdered sugar, and then you'll have a very consistent colorway across, because this is what I noticed. The greens particularly lightened up with the powdered sugar. And so some of the designs that you'll see moving forward have green on the body of the stocking, and those greens became a lot lighter. Even though that cookie was relatively dry before I started adding the powdered sugar, it just made the green a lot lighter because they soaked into the icing. The last three stockings within this set are very similar in size, but they just have a slightly different foot shape or kind of design in the end. And we're going to continue with the next two to have the heel and the cuff and not the toe. And then the final one will have the heel, the cuff, and the toe. So two within this set have heel, cuff, and toe. And then the other three just have cuff and heel. You are welcome to change that design. This is just how I liked it. So you could have a slight differentiation kind of across all of your stockings, but there wasn't one singular that had a toe and then the rest didn't have toes. Once again, you're going to outline your stocking in white icing and then fill it in with the exact same bag. And this time we're going to come in and add just straight lines across the leg, 2 green and then 1 in the middle that's red. And then you're going to grab your scribe. If you have a fine tip one, you can use fine tip. If you don't have a fine tip, it doesn't matter. I literally did not have a fine tip for like 10 years of decorating, and I just got this one, and like I said, I'm very excited about it, but it's not necessary. You can just use a regular scribe here. And then on the toe, you're going to do red with a green line in the middle. And you're just going to alternate dragging up or down through that line. And one thing you want to be very careful of is making sure that you clean off your scribe in between each one. I do not like having color come through where I don't want it to come through. And so I'm very adamant about cleaning off my scribe in between each one of these drags. And then what's different on this cookie is the heel and the cuff are also going to be white. So this is a very white stocking. And you can see here the difference between the matted body and the freshly iced on white heel and cuff. So you just want to make sure that you're letting things dry if you're wanting to add this velvet texture, and then you are sifting on powdered sugar and you're just making sure that it's fully covered. And then when it's very dry, you are dusting off all of this powdered sugar. And you can see I am not holding back. I am brushing very furiously here. This is a completely dry cookie. And so you just want to make sure you're dusting off all that powdered sugar, and then your cookie is good to go. So we're moving on to number 4 in this set. Once again, using your edible pen or your scribe to mark where the cuff and the heel are, and then you're outlining. This is a great example of not touching your piping bag down onto your cookie, but letting the icing flow out of your piping bag. And I will make a concerted effort to touch the cookie with my piping bag where I want my line to end. So right around that heel, it was like touch, do the next part, touch, do the next part. And then you're filling in with your white icing once again. And you're looking to have an even consistency across. So you can see that the icing is almost domed on the cookie, that it's very, very even across. This is how I know I have enough icing on this cookie. Otherwise, it'd be a little lumpy and bumpy. It's a really common thing to do when you first start decorating sugar cookies, to just not add enough icing because it feels like it's going to be too much, or you're scared that it's going to run off your cookie. Literally every single cookie decorator I know has done that. I did that for years. So you just want to make sure you're adding a very even layer. And then we're going to come in with our green and kind of do these triangle squiggle lines. And then we're going to grab our scribe and go from the bottom middle of that triangle up. And you're going to clean your scribe off after every single one of these, and you're making a tree design. Then you're going to come in with your red icing and outline the heel and the cuff of your stocking and fill in those outlines. And like we saw earlier with this red, it's a little thinner. It's working. It doesn't fall off the cookie, which is good. But it kind of fills in almost immediately. And so I really did not need to use my scribe to move it around whatsoever. And that just shows you can have slight differences in your consistencies, particularly this hybrid, the timing. This was probably closer to a 15, maybe even a 12-second icing, and yet it was still holding on the cookie just fine. And I decorate the cuffs of all of the stockings, and then I'm coming in to put the powdered sugar on. So they're not like super fresh. I didn't decorate and then immediately add the powdered sugar. I decorated all of the heels and the cuffs and then came in with the powdered sugar. And this was just to help make sure that the icing didn't fall off of my cookie. And now we're coming into our final one. So like I said, 2 stockings in this set have a toe, heel, and a cuff. And so we're going to outline that on this cookie, and then we're going to come in with the white icing. Every single one of these stockings has a white icing base, and we're going to outline what we just drew onto the cookie. We're going to outline the body of that stocking, fill it in with our icing, being very consistent with our pressure on our icing bag as we're adding that icing to the cookie. And you can see it's very consistent across the entire cookie there. And then coming in with my scribe and just making sure it gets all the way to the edges of this cookie and all the way to the line that we outlined there. And as always, we are making sure to clear off our scribe after every single time we use it. This is why I recommend having a paper towel next to you, because I have little lines, little dots of icing from wiping my scribe off every single time I use it. Then we're going to come in with the green and do these kind of starburst line patterns, because we're going to be making wreaths on this stocking. And there's a lot of different ways you can do wreaths, but I found since this is so small, these stockings are like a little bit bigger than a finger size. Doing lines is the easiest way. We're going to take our scribe and we're going to go in the middle of those lines, halfway through the center, and then we're just going to go in a circle and going around a few times to create that wreath shape. And then I'm coming in with my scribe with a little bit of red on the end. So I put red icing on my paper towel next to me, and I dip my scribe into it so I can have a really fine amount of red icing being placed onto the cookie, because if I used my piping bag, the hole's too big. I would have big red blobs, and I just want little berry accents onto my stocking. And then once the body of that stocking has dried, like I said, you want it to dry completely. This is just crusted over. You want it to be dry before you add the toe, the heel, and the cuff, and before you add powdered sugar. Once again, if you are not wanting to add powdered sugar, if you don't want that texture, if you don't want that extra step, you do not need to do this. You just need to wait until the body is crusted over so you can have a little bit of the dimension between the toe, the heel, and the cuff. But if you want to add that powdered sugar for that velvet texture, then you definitely want a fully dry body of this stocking. And then you're going to come in and just sift powdered sugar onto the toe, the heel, and the cuff. You can see all the other ones that had their icing added to them. You can also see that the powdered sugar is soaked into some of them, and so you can do a couple of layers of powdered sugar. I found kind of doing one, coming back and seeing which one's soaked in and adding another one was really helpful to just make sure they're fully covered and that texture was completely across all of that fresh icing. And then when they are fully dry, brushing off all the excess powdered sugar, and you have your 5 stockings. Download the free guide to follow along and try them for yourself.